The rain came down in heavy sheets the night Thomas Redmond checked into the Ridgeway Inn. He'd been driving for 10 hours straight from Dallas to Denver for a conference and couldn't go any farther. The GPS had glitched out somewhere near the New Mexico border, and now he found himself in the small mountain town of Fall Creek. He'd never heard of it before, and if he hadn't been so bone-tired, he might have turned around and looked for a bigger town with more recognizable hotels. But the glowing red neon sign for the Ridgeway Inn flickered through the mist like a lifeline, promising a bed, a roof, and maybe even a hot shower. The lobby was modest, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of old wood and lemon-scented cleaner. Behind the desk sat a man in his 60s, wearing a red cardigan and bifocals, reading a paperback novel. He looked up slowly when Thomas entered, as if guests were rare and somewhat unwelcome. "You're lucky," the man said, setting down his book. "Last room available." Thomas rubbed his temples. "That's fine. I just need to sleep a few hours. Got a long drive tomorrow." "Room 217, the man said, sliding a brass key across the counter. Not a card, a key. That should have struck Thomas as odd, but he was too exhausted to care. "Stairs are to your left. No elevator." Thomas took the key and offered a tired smile. "Appreciate it. Don't forget to lock the door once you're inside," the man added quietly. Thomas turned back. "Sorry." The man cleared his throat. "I said the lock sticks sometimes. Jiggle it if it gives you trouble." Thomas nodded, not really processing it. He carried his duffel upstairs, the old wood creaking beneath his boots. The hallway was lined with wallpaper that might have been cream-colored 50 years ago, but now looked yellowed and curled at the edges. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Every few steps, he passed a wooden door with a brass number plate. Room 217 sat at the very end of the hall. The door opened with a groan when he turned the key. Inside, the room was cleaner than he expected but dated. Faded green curtains, a floral bedspread, and a boxy old TV set on a wooden dresser. A single nightstand separated the two twin beds. A framed print of some nondescript mountain landscape hung crooked on the wall. Thomas dropped his bag and sat heavily on the edge of the bed closest to the window. The mattress groaned under his weight. He pulled off his boots, socks and jacket, then stretched out fully clothed on the bed, thinking he'd rest for just a moment before showering. He was asleep in seconds. What woke him wasn't a sound, but a feeling, like pressure in the air, or a presence standing over him. His eyes snapped open. The room was nearly pitch black, except for the faint red glow of the digital clock on the nightstand. 3:12 a.m. He blinked, trying to adjust to the dark, then sat up slowly. The first thing he noticed was that the air felt colder than it had earlier. Not just cooler but unnaturally cold. The window was closed. The heater had been off when he came in. Yet, his breath fogged slightly as he exhaled. Then he noticed something stranger. The bed across from him, the second twin bed, was unmade. Thomas distinctly remembered the beds being perfectly made when he came in. But now, the sheets on the second bed were crumpled, the pillow was indented, and the blanket was bunched near the foot like someone had slept there, or was still sleeping there. He reached over to the lamp and flipped the switch. Nothing. He tried again, but the light stayed off. Thomas pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and landed squarely on the second bed. It was empty. No one in it. No sign of movement. But the imprint of a body was still there. He stood up and crossed the room, running his hand across the sheets. They were ice cold. Not just cool from the air, but like someone had dragged them out of a freezer. His heart began to race. Then the TV flickered to life. No sound. Just static. Thomas spun around, light darting toward the screen. The remote sat untouched on the dresser. He hadn't turned it on. Slowly, he approached the TV and pressed the power button. It didn't turn off. He pressed it again, nothing. He yanked the cord from the outlet. The static continued. He dropped the cord, stumbling backward, and that's when he heard it. A voice. Low, whispering, somewhere between the wall and his ear. "Go!" He froze. "Go, now!" It was a woman's voice. Gentle, desperate. He turned in circles, trying to pinpoint where it came from. The sound seemed to fill the entire room, like it was coming from inside his own head. Then, in the reflection of the TV screen, he saw her. A woman standing directly behind him. He spun around, light raised, nothing. Empty room. He turned the flashlight back to the TV. Her reflection was gone. Thomas grabbed his bag and bolted out the door without looking back. He half ran down the stairs and into the lobby. The man behind the desk was gone. The room was empty, dark. The only light came from a wall lamp above a faded map of Fall Creek. He rang the bell. No answer. He rang it again, louder. Still nothing. Then, from behind him, he heard footsteps descending the stairs he'd just come down. Low. Deliberate. He turned and saw no one. The air was icy again. He backed up toward the desk, breathing hard. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the temperature normalized. The lights flickered back to life. The TV static sound that had somehow followed him all the way downstairs faded into silence. The man in the cardigan reappeared behind the desk as if he'd never been gone. He looked calm, even casual. "Everything all right, Mr. Redmond?" Thomas blinked. "What the hell is going on in that room?" The man gave a small sigh and glanced at the register. "Room 217. I should have known." "You knew something was wrong with that room?" Thomas asked, voice shaking. "You gave it to me." The man looked genuinely apologetic. "It's the last room we ever rent. Only when we're full. Most folks don't stay more than a few hours." Thomas stared at him, waiting for more. The man folded his hands. Back in 1982, a woman named Evelyn Marks checked in during a snowstorm. Traveling alone. Stayed in 217. Next morning, housekeeping found her dead. No signs of struggle. No injuries. She just never woke up. "People die in hotels all the time," Thomas snapped. "That doesn't explain what just happened to me." "No," the man agreed. "But the guests who stay in that room say they see her. Some hear her crying. Others wake up with her lying next to them. We've had the room blessed, cleansed, sealed. Nothing works. She always comes back." Thomas shook his head. "You should close this place down." The man gave a humorless chuckle. "You think I don't want to? You think I haven't tried? But this building's older than the town itself. The Ridgeway's part of Fall Creek history. Nobody wants to tear it down." Thomas didn't wait to hear more. He grabbed his keys, headed into the storm, and drove off without even asking for a refund. He didn't care where he ended up that night. He just wanted out. But as the miles rolled by and the town of Fall Creek vanished behind him, Thomas glanced at the passenger seat. A small detail froze him in place. There, resting neatly on the seat beside him, was the brass key to room 217. He had left it on the nightstand, and next to it was a single red rose. Thomas didn't stop driving until the sun came up. He didn't remember passing any towns, just winding mountain roads, the occasional deer, and that ever-present feeling that something was following him. It was irrational, he kept telling himself. He was overtired. What he saw was some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Sleep deprivation can do wild things to the mind. But every time he glanced at the key sitting on the passenger seat, that cold brass tag reading room 217, a tight knot twisted in his stomach. He tried tossing it out the window at one point, but when he stopped for gas hours later, it was back on the seat. The rose was gone, though. He made it to Denver, checked into a sleek, modern hotel, and tried to pretend everything was normal. But sleep didn't come. Not that night, not the next. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw her face. Pale, peaceful, but with eyes that begged for something he didn't understand. Sometimes he'd wake gasping, convinced someone had just whispered in his ear. He even went to a walk-in clinic after the second night, thinking he was having some sort of breakdown. The doctor suggested stress, gave him some mild sleep aids, and told him to unplug for a while. But even the pills didn't help. They only made him slower, groggier, and easier for the dreams to creep in. Always the same room. The same bed. The same cold air. On the fourth day, he found himself Googling Ridgeway in Fall Creek. There wasn't much. A few blurry photos, no website, a handful of reviews. Most of them years old. One stuck out. A 1-star post from 2011. Do not stay in room 217. I had a nightmare that someone climbed into bed with me. Woke up to find the sheets damp and cold like someone had been there. Manager said I imagined it. Never sleeping there again. Another from 2016. Beautiful view of the mountains, but I couldn't sleep a wink. Felt like someone was watching me the entire night. Heard a woman whispering. Room 217 should be condemned. And then, the most recent from just a few months ago. No name. No stars. Just a sentence. She's still waiting for someone to listen. Thomas slammed his laptop shut. By the end of the week, he wasn't himself anymore. His co-workers noticed at the conference. The bags under his eyes, his distracted behavior, his growing irritation. He started snapping at people, forgetting names, losing track of conversations. And when he looked in the mirror on the last day of the event, he swore he saw a shadow behind him, just for a second, long enough to feel the hairs on his arms rise. He knew he couldn't keep going like this. It wasn't going to stop until he went back. And part of him, a small, trembling part, wanted to go back. So he did. He drove through the night again, back through winding roads and endless forest until he reached Fall Creek. The town was even smaller than he remembered. A diner, a gas station, a post office, and the Ridgeway Inn. The sign still flickered red through the drizzle. He parked and sat in the car for a long time, staring at the building. The windows were all dark. No lights, no cars in the lot. He wondered if it was closed, but something told him it wasn't. Not for her. The key to room 217 sat in his palm like it had never left. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the lobby looked just the same, like time hadn't passed at all. The man behind the desk wasn't there, but the old guest book sat open, pen resting beside it. Thomas didn't sign it. He climbed the stairs slowly, one hand grazing the old wooden rail. Every step groaned under his weight. At the top, the hallway stretched out before him. The faded wallpaper, the dim buzzing lights, the worn carpet. He knew where to go. His feet remembered. Room 217. He stood in front of the door, key in hand, for what felt like an hour. Then he slid it into the lock and turned. The room was exactly as he'd left it. Untouched, dusty, still frozen in that strange 1980s decor. The beds were made. The window was shut. The television was off. But it was colder now. Not just cold, wrong. Like walking into a place where no living thing belonged. He stepped inside and shut the door. This time he didn't lie down. He sat in the armchair by the window and waited. The key rested in his lap. His fingers trembled, but he stayed. The first sign was the smell. Faint perfume, floral and old-fashioned, like something a woman might have worn in another decade. Then came the pressure in the air, thick, heavy, like gravity had increased. The clock on the nightstand blinked to 3:12 a.m. And then she appeared. She didn't drift or float. She simply was. Standing by the bed, exactly where he remembered her reflection. Her skin was pale and perfect, her eyes wide, sad and dark. She wore a long nightgown that moved slightly, though there was no wind. Her hair was pinned up in soft curls, and she looked almost gentle, like someone lost. Not malevolent, not yet. Thomas stood slowly, heart pounding. She turned to him. "You came back," she said, her voice like a memory. "I don't know what you want from me," Thomas whispered. She took a step forward. The air dropped another 10 degrees. "I didn't mean to die," she said. "They said I was sick. They said it was my heart. But I know what happened." Thomas blinked. "What do you mean?" "I wasn't alone in this room that night." She was shaking now, her arms folded like she was cold. Her eyes searched his like she was pleading for someone, anyone, to believe her. "I heard footsteps. I felt someone sit beside me. I tried to scream but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then there was darkness. Thomas took a step forward. Who was it? She looked past him toward the door. I never saw him, but he comes back. Again and again. And when people sleep here. He tries again. Thomas's blood ran cold. Why me? He asked. Why did you come to me? She looked at him like it was the most obvious answer in the world. Because you listened. The room grew darker, though no lights had changed. A presence filled the space behind Thomas. Not hers. Something heavier, crueler. He turned slowly. The corner of the room seemed to swell with shadow. It wasn't shaped like a person, but it felt aware. The walls pulsed faintly, and the floor beneath him seemed to tilt. She stepped in front of him. You need to go, she said. He's awake now. What about you? She shook her head. I can't leave. But you still can. Thomas grabbed his bag and turned to the door. The knob was red hot when he touched it, but he forced it open. The hallway was darker than before, like the lights had all dimmed at once. He heard something behind him, a whisper or a breath, or maybe the floor creaking under something impossibly heavy. He ran down the stairs, out the door into the parking lot. Behind him, the windows of room 217 glowed faintly with light. Back in the car, he locked the doors and sat shaking. But he didn't drive off this time. Instead, he took out his phone and recorded a voice memo, just in case. If anyone hears this, he said, don't go to Fall Creek. Don't stay at the Ridgeway Inn. And if you do, don't sleep in room 217. I don't know who she was or what that thing is in there with her. But she's trapped. And it wants company. He looked back once more at the building. For just a moment he saw her, standing in the window, watching. Then he turned the key in the ignition and drove off without ever looking back again. He never spoke of it to anyone. Not to his friends. Not to his family. But sometimes at night,